the most dangerous thing to a person is another person.
Yeah.
And so very quickly we started being the dominant things on the Serengeti because we could throw stuff. Everything's afraid of getting a rock to the head. I learned this in Indonesia well before I was doing biology because I was being surrounded by monkeys coming from everywhere. They had completely tactically beaten me. I reached down to pick up a rock, and by the time I was standing up again, all the monkeys were gone.
It's still Friday, June 7th, and we're going to do another one here. And this is we're going to talk about something that's been long a passion of yours.
Yeah, I've been really interested in this topic. Again, I sort of fell into it. It wasn't something I was planning. Much like the dopamine, it was just something that became obvious to me very quickly. So I was teaching a human evolution class, and I enjoyed talking about the stone tools, and I just followed the general description of them. And so these were the very first stone tools are understood as sort of a kind of like a Swiss Army knife. It was something you could slice with or you could chop with, and it was sometimes called a hand axe. It's about the size of your hand, and it's sharp all the way around. And so these things started by Homo erectus around 2 million years ago.
These are these triangular.
The triangular-ish. Some people call them teardrop shape. I think they look sort of like the outline of Africa, personally. Some people call them symmetrical. I think they look like Africa. If you call Africa symmetrical, I don't call that symmetrical.
Doesn't look symmetrical.
So there's a lot of discussion on what they are and how they are, and I thought that this was all well established when I was reading the textbooks. But as soon as I started reading papers on them, I realized that there was a lot of opinion, and that it was getting into sort of meta philosophy about what these things were for. It was really weird. There were people who thought that so one of the problems with hand axes is if you do edge wear analysis, you don't find any edge wear on several of them, on a lot of them. So even if they were being used for slicing and chopping, as we said, you would find edge wear on.
You mean that the edge shows signs of wear
on only a few of them?
But when you say edge wear, you mean that you would expect.
It looks like it was used.
If these were used for scraping and cutting,
yeah,
they would have signs of wear on the edge,
right,
which would reveal this.
Right. And sometimes they do it. So you can find ones that were used for cutting meat and bones, and you'll see little chips, little microchips along the edge. You can see ones that were probably used for taking bark off a stick, and those will look polished at the edge. And so you can actually tell what things were used for looking at the micro wear. A lot of these show no micro wear at all. And so people were like, what could possibly be being done with something that doesn't get used? Why would you make so many of these? And these tools are so common. There's literally millions of them. In some places, they're littering the ground. So in a place where there was a factory, essentially, of these happening, people would go to that spot and make lots and lots and lots of them. And you just see them littering the ground. One every half meter, there'd be another hand axe just sitting on the surface of sort of a deserty, open grassland. So they were very, very common. They were often not used.
So these were stone objects that 1 million years ago,
2 million years
2
ago,
million years ago,
and 1 million years ago.
For 1 million years,
or
our precursors were making from stone.
Making from stone.
One after another, after another, after another, after another.
Exactly. And then often not using them, which is sort of strange. And they'd replaced an earlier technology, which was much simpler and very useful. You can slaughter a goat they have, and then take it apart and take the hide off, and take off all of the meat and all this using something that's just a rock with a chip out the side. So now you have a sharp chip. You take that sharp chip, and that's everything you need. So these were complex tools that took a lot of planning and forethought to create. Even that's up for discussion, but anyway, they took a lot of work to make, and they are everywhere over millions and millions of years. So one of the hypotheses was that, well, these were because this is what women are attracted to, and that men would be making these hand axes to attract women, and as a display thing, like the peacock's tail, or the horns of a bighorn sheep. That these were just to display for the females, and
Okay.
and that's why they weren't used, and that they could be tools, and that they were useful as tools, but we made so many of them because the person who could make the best ones and the most of them would attract the females. I have a couple objections to this. One,
having worked stone yourself.
Yeah, one, it's difficult to work with. Two, it's not a particularly attractive shape. No one I've ever talked to has said, "Oh, that really makes me interested in you, that you're standing next to this rock." That just has never, ever happened. And the other thing is, usually if something is that kind of social attractive item, fashion is involved. And fashion tends to change. And so this is an artifact that didn't change over almost 2 million years.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So it remained the same. There were some improvements over time. It got a little thinner in some cases, taking a little bit more skill to make as people got smarter. Brains were improving over this entire time as well. But at the beginning, there was this transition of what they called least effort tools, which were just basically a chip, to then this fully formed, planned tool that seems to have a particular shape.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the hand axe.
you have a bunch of them, and I've held some of them, and it does feel like it.
Well, see, that's the thing that happened. I had gone along with, they're just Swiss Army knives, and I had been teaching this, and then I met someone online who was a mercenary in Oman during the 1970s.
That's somebody you only want to meet online.
Well, it sounded like an interesting person. He was former British Special Forces, and he'd been a mercenary in Oman, working at the level of roughly a colonel, so a high-level person organizing their air force, I think. And he'd been given access to forbidden zones that only the military could go into. And so he went driving around, picking up hand axes off the ground, because there was a lot of them.
Wow.
And he was getting on in life and needed to do something in his collection, so I bought his collection.
You bought his entire... Oh, I thought you got a couple of pieces from him. You
No,
bought his entire collection.
I wanted the whole thing because I wanted everything he picked up. I wanted to see the whole ones. I wanted to see the broken ones. I wanted to see the variability.
And was he willing to just part with it en masse?
Yeah,
wow.
and I said I wouldn't, we agreed on a price. I said I wouldn't haggle with him if you gave me a dot on a map. So he gave me a treasure map as well. So I know where he got them. And so I was really excited for these things.
I didn't know how you got the location. That's interesting. You made it part of the deal. I made
it definitely part of the deal.
Yeah.
He's like, well, it's been a long time. This is the best of my recollection, but it's here. And he, drew a circle on a map for me. And I'm like, I just wanted it online. You actually mailed me a map, but fine. Anyway, so he found this stuff. I got it in my hands. And as soon as I picked it up, I'm like, this isn't a Swiss Army knife. This is a weapon. And, someone who's experienced in martial arts and has, held a lot of different kinds of weapons. I've collected antique weapons. As soon as I held it, I realized this is not something that you're making merely to cut meat off of a leg or taking bark off of a stick. This is someone's, K-bar marine fighting knife. This is a tool that can be used for all of those things, but it is very clearly a weapon. So, for example, if I had a knife can be used for a lot of different things. But if I see a guard, a cross piece on a knife just above where the knuckles go and where you're holding it, I know I'm also looking at a weapon, because you don't need a guard on a kitchen knife. Kitchen knives don't have that. Fighting knives do.
In fact, it would kind of get in the way of what you're doing with a kitchen knife.
In many cases. But you could still use one that had a guard as a tool.
Oh, of course.
If you look at a fighting knife, the edge is going to be thicker than it would be on a kitchen knife. The kitchen knife is going to be better for slicing. A fighting knife can go through heavy meat, so it'd be very useful as a tool if you wanted to chop off, say, a turkey. And that's certainly what hand axes would be used for. If you want to chop up big pieces of meat, a hand axe is going to be useful for it. But there's differences in design between what you would be using in a sort of everyday slicing context. So that was the original chips. Those chips were fine edges, they were thin edges, they're very sharp. The edge of a hand axe looks like an M or a W. It goes up and down. It's not just like a serrated, but up and down, side to side. It's not a straight edge. It's much more rough, and it's part of how it gets made. But it's still pretty good for cutting, but it wouldn't be that great for cutting in a straight line like you'd normally use a knife. A chip is better for that. A chip has a single straight edge, and if you want to slice something, that's what you want. The way a hand axe is made, it's not so good. They have a point. The point is very broad. It's not great for making a hole in something. It's not great for drilling. It would be good for stabbing, let's say. It's very thick. It's not going to break off easily.
Might be good at flying through the air at something.
Well, see, that's the next thought I was having. I picked it up, and immediately I felt that it was weighted in a way that if I held it at the tip, the other end was heavier and would act as a sort of lever arm for throwing. And that it was sharp all the way around the edge, so it became sort of a ninja throwing star. And as soon as I realized this, I realized this is a weapon. This is something that can be thrown. It is not for attracting the opposite sex. And it is also definitely a tool. I wasn't denying it's a tool, but it's not made the way you would have wanted to make the tool.
Yeah, it's fascinating that your first thought when you picked it up was that, oh, if I hold it at the narrow end, this will fly really well when I throw it. And what I was going to say is that when I picked it up, the way that the base of it, the wider part, fit into the palm of my hand, made it feel like I could
absolutely stab it as well.
Yeah.
So this was your personal defense weapon, in my opinion. So I then started doing research, having had this thought. I'm like, oh my God, are all the textbooks wrong? And I found there were other people who thought this. I was not the only person who had thought this. And I found that there was actually quite a long history of people thinking this, going back to the very first people talking about these things.
Really?
Really, really. So the very first descriptions of stone tools found by people who had no idea what they were that these were elf darts, that the elves would hide in the bushes and throw these things at you, and that this was some sort of weapon that would be thrown at you. And so we saw them that way. But that was mythology, so we didn't worry about it. And plus, it was included in a lot of things. We didn't classify everything was an elf dart back then.
Yeah.
You know, also a lightning bolt. Again, something that flies through the air, maybe thrown by God. But something thrown through the air was definitely an idea that a lot of these stone tools had.
Yeah.
Some of them probably had been arrowheads thrown through the air. Some of them have been spearheads thrown through the air. Some of them were hand axes, but also included in things that were thrown through the air. So I started doing some research, and I found out that the earlier people who had thought about it had not really left any. There was no science being done on these ideas, but there was an early science fiction of H.G. Wells of Time Machine fame, who called them hand bolts, and so he had people back. You know, he thought 10,000 years ago was prehistory and the earliest humans. Because they didn't know that these things were millions of years old at that time. And so he was looking at people in prehistoric France and throwing hand bolts at each other. And so he had them as thrown weapons. And
could you imagine being hit in the chest by
one of
those flying through the air?
So then...
I mean, hit in the head would kill you.
People started thinking about this. And so there's actually a talk by Leakey back in the 1960s, and he thought that there was some particular shapes that would be better for throwing. They're about the size of your hand. They're shaped like an S, so they have a sort of almost like the shape of a fan blade, which you can imagine spinning through the air. So he called them the S-shaped hand axes, and so he thought that there was a particular group that could be used in this way. And the problem is archaeology started to go in a different direction after that. We started not thinking about tools in a way where you would classify them by use in that same way. And so they were all just starting to be called not even hand axes, but bifacial tools. We weren't going to speculate about what they were used for other than let's try an experiment and we can cut with them. Oh, they could be cut. They could be used for slaughtering, or they could be used for polishing a stick.
It seems like we consciously turned away from using our imagination.
Something like that. I'm still unclear about what was happening. It was
I mean, we were just having conversations about being able to imagine the universe and that as a legitimate path towards knowledge. And you're saying that these people literally turned away from that.
The problem is anytime you start putting your ideas on prehistory, you're speculating and you're adding bias to something. And so trying to avoid bias, we try and say, we don't know what these things are. All we know is that they were pieces of stone worked on two sides. So they're bifacial tools.
And when I pick it up, I really feel like throwing it for some reason.
So there's only been a couple of papers and articles written on it. There was one guy who thought it was used for hunting. He wrote an article entirely speculative. And he showed one landing on a zebra and the zebra arcing its back and therefore falling over and therefore being able to be killed.
Hardy, har.
Exactly. I pick up one of these things and if I threw it at a zebra, the zebra would then come over and kill me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same with any large
Zebras
animals.
Are mean.
Same with, Cape buffalo or even a wildebeest. There's really nothing out there that isn't just going to be pissed at you.
Maybe if you have 100 guys all throwing it at the head at the same time, time on target.
Maybe it's possible. You could use it for some smaller things, smaller game. It would work. It certainly would work on a rabbit, but so does a rock. You don't need to make a tool for some of the smaller things. And so a lot of that sort of hunting could probably be done with a rock and not needing as much as.
Well, on the other hand, a rock could be a thrown weapon against another person too.
And so I started looking into what the archaeology says. And so at the same time as these tools developed, we also developed the physical ability to throw. We developed a scapula that moved differently. We developed wrists and elbows that moved differently. At the same exact time these tools arose. So we're now pretty sure that things started being thrown then. We just don't know if it was these tools. And I would maintain that they were. There was an experiment where someone took a very large one, a 1 kilo one, and turned it into a fiberglass model and was throwing it like a Frisbee. And every time they threw it, it landed edge on. I tried doing this myself, and I found replicated none of those results. When I threw it, it stayed pretty much the orientation I would throw it at. I made cement models that I weighted same as the originals. And I used a baseball as my control. And it turned out that my mid-range hand axe weighed exactly as much as a baseball. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
No, of course not. How could it be?
And it threw just as well as a baseball. It was as fast, as accurate. So anything you could do with a baseball, you could do with a hand axe. So this is definitely a precision throwing thing like a baseball is, but designed sharp all the way around. So the idea of it being used to hurt something is possible. But why wouldn't it have been used much? And why don't we find broken ones? The answer is we do find broken ones. And it's the tips broken off, just as you would expect, particularly from throwing. It's the same thing that happened to my reproduced ones. The tips broke off. And it looks just like the ones that I got from this guy in Oman with the broken tips. I started to think about what we do with weapons in our world. And I started trying to picture the early world of Homo erectus as a confrontational scavenger. So you see the birds flying over a kill, and you start running to this kill, and you butcher it, and you take home the stuff. And that works great for your little chips that you can use to butcher something. So
that you can carry with you as
easily.
You're running to the kill.
Right. But then your population does well because now you've got a new source of food. You can slice through an elephant's hide with your chip tools that nothing else can get into. But now there's more of you and you're all trying to get that same thing. And so you need a weapon. And so you make this thing that you can use to cut through your elephant. You can break a bone with it, and you can throw it really well. And if you see another person and you're both starting to jump up and down and scream at each other holding your hand axes, and there's 6 of you with hand axes and the other guys don't have any, they're going to leave. And if they don't, they're going to get a hand axe to the chest and it's going to cut them. It might not kill them, but if you're naked, getting a sharp rock spinning at 60 miles an hour to the chest, you're never coming back again. You're done. And so people started having to carry these things as personal weapons. They were their personal knife, but they were also their personal defense, competing for a particular resource. Probably there was this long transition from this confrontational scavenging. We'd use rocks and dirt clods to get rid of lions or hyenas, but we'd use our hand axes to compete with conspecifics, other Homo erectus. There was probably a transition to the persistence hunting, where we would just chase things down. Now the hand axe is also useful because I can use it to do the killing blow. I've got this pointy thing in my hand. Once I've chased something down, I need to finish it off. The hand axe can be used for that. But if I need to compete with someone, I have a way of defending we have ways of defending
But
ourselves.
you can only carry one.
Well, you can only carry one, and you better be carrying it with you. And throughout human history, the most dangerous thing to a person is another person.
Yeah.
And so very quickly, we started being the dominant things on the Serengeti because we could throw stuff. Everything's afraid of getting a rock to the head. And so it was defense. You're carrying your rock at all times. If something does come at you, a lion's coming at you, you might not kill it. And it might kill you. But it's now gotten a rock to the head. It's not going to get the next guy because it knows that guy's got a rock. And so as soon as a lion sees you raising your hand above your head, everything's going to run from you. I learned this in Indonesia well before I was doing biology because I was being surrounded by monkeys coming from everywhere. They had completely tactically beaten me. I reached down to pick up a rock, and by the time I was standing up again, all the monkeys were gone. This is something that every animal learns. They might not know it in this country where no one throws rocks at them anymore, but every animal will learn that if you pick up a rock, you better run. And I think the animals in the Serengeti knew this very well.
We have powers they cannot conceive of.
And our brain developed in relation to this as well. The left side of our brain dedicated to language is actually based on movement, motor neurons. That decide very precise movements. And the portions of our temporal lobe where it comes together with our parietal lobe and governs motions is also the seat that of the area that can actually figure out where a target is. So as we got better at this, the left side of our brain got larger in the exact same areas of the brain that became language. And so the same throwing areas, those same motor control areas, needed really large brains to get them to work, but would give you incremental benefits. As you get better at throwing, your brain gets slightly bigger. You need a bigger brain because a single neuron isn't precise enough to be accurate enough to hit something while throwing. You need microsecond precision to throw something accurately, and neurons fire at millisecond speeds. So you need hundreds of neurons working together to give you an average that is precise enough to actually hit something. But even tens of neurons working together will be more precise than one. So as you keep adding more neurons, you're going to get better and better at targeting. So as you get better and better at targeting, you're going to be surviving more in competition. You're going to be getting more food. Yeah, you can hit that rabbit with a rock. So yes, we were throwing everything at everything. Throwing was our big specialty as humans. Our brains grew because of it. And one of the things we threw was our primary tool. The hand axe was the tool from about 2 million years ago to about 300,000 years ago.
Basically, you're saying it's the only thing we made for 2 million years.
It's the only thing we made for 2 million years.
I mean, you brought to mind, you showed me images of rows and rows of hand axes in the ground,
yeah,
sticking with their points up.
I don't know about that. I read a paper about that, and I saw one thing where it looked like they'd been up but then fell over.
But it seems like that's that's an armory. Like that's
that's the thing. Is so
you just
the
bend
explanation
down,
of why
stand up, throw, bend down, stand up, throw.
Why we made so many of them? What have we stockpiled in the world over time? As we stockpiled weapons.
Yeah.
And so why have things that you don't actually use? Why are so many of these tools showing no wear on the side?
Because they make me strong.
Yeah. So you have piles of these things. The last place thrown weapons like this were used in historical periods was Vanuatu. There was something called the kawas, and they were often just a sort of a club made of coral. And so it could be useful as a club, but you could also throw it like a throwing stick. But there were other versions of them that looked much more like a Paleolithic hand axe. They were sharp all the way around. They had a point. They would have been someone's personal knife, and they were specifically used for throwing. When you walked into a village, you had to leave your kawas in a pile outside the village to show your peaceful intentions. I think these piles of hand axes that we find next to where people were living are very similar.
Oh, very interesting.
These are the stockpiled places. People might have been having to leave them there to show peaceful intentions, but they're also the power of the village. If you are naked and you don't have pockets, and you only have one hand axe, and you come across a bunch of people who brought their meat back to their home base, at their home base, they've got hundreds of hand axes. They can throw hand axes at you all day. And so you're going to back off. So now you have a defendable place that you've stockpiled your weapons at. And so this is a theory of throwing that builds on other people's theories of, yes, we are throwing animals. Yes, the hand axe could have been thrown, but I'm trying to put it into a more holistic context of this is what specifically we were doing with them. This is why they have the form they did. This is why that form lasted for 2 million years, because it fit really well in the hand for throwing. I'm not saying everything sometimes called a bifacial tool was a hand axe. Some of them are 2 kilos. I don't think it's something you can throw in that same way. I think the baseball-sized ones or weight ones, I think those were probably thrown because they're things that are the same weight of things that we throw. I think Leakey was very much onto something with these S-shaped ones.
Oh, you think maybe Leakey was onto something?
Because they look like spinning fan blades. You know, they really look like something you could throw very effectively.
If only he had a little more time to work, he might have gotten somewhere.
Yeah, no, there was some problems with his wife as well. They started disagreeing, and his ideas fell out of favor.
Still kind of made a name.
He definitely did, but those were in his early days. His later days
didn't do so well.
Yeah,
it's fascinating though. I remember you first telling me this idea, and of course it was the first time I had heard the thought that they were thrown. I had only been taught that these things were scraping tools, and it was like a flashbulb moment. It was like, of course. Because what else do people do? We fight with each other. Yeah. And this concept of the first and only thing we made for 2 million years, but the way you describe us then, it feels very much the same now, and it took us 2 million years to get from that one idea, and then it's taken us how long? 50, 100,000 years to get to where we are now.
Well, things have accelerated a lot. So starting around 300,000 years ago, you start getting spears. Then maybe, depends on who you talk to, 50,000 years, maybe 5,000 years, you start getting arrows. It depends on the areas as well. You start getting things that can throw spears further. Technology starts speeding up. You get needles and thread, and it all starts accelerating because each technology builds on the other one. But yeah, this one was the first technology, and it existed for 2 million years.
It's just almost inconceivable, and it makes me feel like we are children playing with nuclear weapons. It's
yes, no, we're still the same people. We really haven't changed. We're doing the same thing, just making piles of weapons at our front door. Yes, exactly.
Because the scariest thing is another person.
But it's also interesting to think about it, how it's also the basis for our language. So certainly English works this way, but every language seems to have nouns, verbs, and objects. So you noun the verb at the object, or you verb the object at the noun.
The object at the noun. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing. These are built into the way our brain works. That are the concepts are involved in throwing, having a target, having a set of motions to send that thing to the target, predicting ahead of time where that target's going to be so that your stone can get there at the same time. All of these things are built into the way we think, by making predictions about the way language itself works.
So you're saying that the throwing is the beginning of what makes us human.
Not the beginning. It is what makes us human.
It is the essence of what makes
Yeah,
us
so
human.
that language is what makes us human, but language is piggybacking on the expansion of the brain that was allowed by this. And then so language was piggybacking and then giving us further advantages, but the main advantage was throwing. And
So throwing was both caused by and a cause of the growing brain.
yes, well, I mean, and unlike a lot of other things where you need a big brain to make a good tool, a little bit of an improvement in throwing is going to get you calories right away and get you defense right away. Chimpanzees throw things at stuff. They throw sticks at animals. They throw clods of dirt and rocks at other chimpanzees. So this is something already in our lineage. But chimps do it very badly. They can only do a sort of sidearm. They can't get their arm behind them to throw. Their brains are too small to give really accurate targeting. So they throw, but they very rarely hit what they're throwing at. We're really good at hitting what we throw at.
Fascinating.
And we don't think about it. We think about, being smart and talking, but we don't think about throwing as really what makes us human.
And then one day we made guns.
Yeah, and that just throws things better for us. But it's still the same brain action. You're still thinking about the target. You're still thinking about how you aim something. You're still thinking about timing. It's still the same set of neurons.
Yeah, it's like everything. Video games.
Yeah.
Sports.
And so self-defense is really at the center of also of what makes us humans. This wasn't just for hunting. This was defending against other humans. Well, that's helpful. Look, okay, so here's one more thing. So we also get from this the idea of mutually assured destruction. This is something that allows us to not kill each other. So if I have one hand axe and you have one hand axe, and we both hold them up in the air, whoever throws first loses because they don't have a hand axe anymore, and you can run right up to them and hit them with your hand axe. And so in male-male competition, we learned how to not kill each other. And this is important in biology. The same thing with the stags hitting each other with those pointy antlers. They have to figure out a way that they hit each other directly and they don't gore each other and kill each other, because then every time they try to mate, they kill each other. Even though there's no more higher stakes than winning a mate, they have to figure out a way to use those pointy antlers to push at each other and not kill each other. I think that was how these things were used. So it wasn't a peacock's tail. It was much more stag's antlers as male-male competition in that context. So it was first competing for food items, but then competition with each other. We learned how to use these things for display, jumping up and down, holding my shiny hand axe, sometimes with stripes in it or other colorful things that might be attractive. But that's part of my display activity in competing with another male.
But then once you get that kill or whatever it is back to your home base, then you have the pile of
Yes, you've made your
weapons.
Castle, essentially. You've got your pile of weapons.
So we find them everywhere because
And
we
it is
needed these all
every
the
part
time.
of our behavior. It is our resource acquisition. It is involved in mating, but it's not involved in mating like attracting a mate. It's involved in mating like male-male competition for a mate. It's everything. We're encouraged to be very aggressive because whoever wins that fight gets the mate. But we're also encouraged to back down, because if you get a hand axe to the head, it's over. So you back down rather than throwing your hand axe. The first one to throw loses. So there's a game theory aspect to it that has encouraged our ability to live together. We need to live together in groups. So we had to have more than one male around. We couldn't just fight all the other ones off. We had to live in groups of males. And those males had to learn how to not kill each other with these dangerous edged pointy weapons that we carried all the time. And that's also been part of our history. We've always carried a knife. We've always carried a spear. And we had to not kill the other guys we were working with, even though they had women. And if we took their women and killed them, we'd get their women. Why didn't we do this? Because it was going to be bad for us. And we might lose that fight. And with hand axes, we almost definitely were going to lose that fight if it was a fair fight. If we sat there and squared off with someone, you throw first, you're going to lose.
I love the idea of two guys standing there naked, holding their hand axes, both knowing that neither of them can throw it. It's like a rap fight or a dance off.
Absolutely.
There's nothing.
And I remember distinctly this with my brother. Many things in our evolution, we sort of what they call recapitulate, we copy in our development. And so I remember the stage with my brother when we both got to the point where we realized if we pick up a rock, no one can throw that rock. And you have to back down. And it's something that's just built very deeply in, because one, you're going to hurt the other person, but I'm really pissed. I want to hurt them. I'm going to get hurt because I might miss.
There's another thing that you make me think of. I spent years in summer camps and then running summer camps and watching, small children grow up and that were not my own well before I had kids. And I remember this one time I was watching this boy, this 9-year-old boy. He picked up a rock and he knew that the rule was that you can't throw rocks. And I'm looking at him and I say, don't do it. And he's looking at me and he doesn't want to, and he doesn't want to, and his hand goes up and he's trying. He doesn't want to be in trouble. He sees that I'm looking at him and say, don't throw that rock. And his hand is up and he throws the rock and he bursts into tears.
Yeah.
And he couldn't.
You can't help yourself.
Not throw the rock. It was
Absolutely.
almost not in his control. He didn't want to, but he also couldn't resist the impulse. And then he wept.
Right. And we try and stop children doing what evolution wants them to do. Evolution wants you to run around.
Primal level.
Wants you to run around. Evolution wants you to shout and yell and talk. And evolution wants you to not throw stuff. And those are the things that they can't do in school. They can't run around, shout, yell, and talk, and throw. It's all they want to do.
Especially the boys, but the girls too. Yeah.
And our most basic games are chase each other and throw stuff at each other.
Watching, we had the girl first, and watching the boy grow up at now at 5. My wife is just constantly amazed at what a boy he is.
Yep. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Josh.
That's good for now.
Wonderful getting back to the beginnings of the podcast.
Yeah, the evolutionary stuff is fun.
All right, folks, check us out at our website, mindbodyevolution.info. Until next time.